When we went to school, we took different subjects such as maths, English, science, geography. We definitely studied these subjects, but let me ask you a question. Were we ever taught how to study and how to learn? Sure, teachers and tutors explained to us a concept and broke down things in a way that we could understand them. But that's not the same as teaching us how to learn in the first place. There's a subtle difference. Most of us just figured out how to wing learning as we went along. Some started from mediocre strategies and naturally developed good strategies. Some people were just naturally smart and used effective methods from the beginning. But for the rest, it was a matter of trial and error, haphazardly trying different things or just trying what intuitively came to us. The fact that we don't learn the deliberate techniques that are actually effective in terms of learning is going to be a big problem, especially now that AI is changing the landscape so quickly. In terms of our career, if we want to stay relevant, we need to continue learning. If we want to move up, we might need to expand our skill set or go deeper within a certain domain. And if we end up needing to switch careers, which is becoming more and more likely as AI progresses, then we need to know how to learn effectively to make that switch possible and feasible. That's why learning how to learn isn't just a nice to have skill, it's actually an AI survival strategy. In this video, I want to share my experience in learning how to learn and how it's made a big difference. So I first started getting exposed to proper learning techniques when I stumbled across a Justin Sung video on YouTube where he was analyzing the pitfalls of over-relying on Anki. When I heard the way he analyzed it and broke down the pitfalls, it made me really realize that there is actually a method and a science to learning deliberately, and it was something that I never paid attention to before, even though I was very studious and hardworking and I really studied and got good marks at school. It made me realize that it was quite unlikely that the way I was approaching things was optimized or efficient. It was just a way I naturally and intuitively approached learning up until that stage, and because I had gotten good enough results, I never really seeked out better methods or techniques. So that YouTube video led me to a learning course called I Can Study. It led to a lot of insights in terms of how I view learning and how I approach learning nowadays. I realized that the ways myself and other people approach learning, it's quite casual, it's quite unintentional, it's not really science-based or evidence-based. It's something we do without having put much thought into how to do it and without having an expert teach us since we were young. The standard is quite low in terms of how good people are at studying. If someone's actually really naturally smart, I would claim that they're applying a lot of the correct techniques and strategies naturally without much guidance, unless they were taught, of course. But for the rest of us, the way we get to a competent level is it's a bit of luck combined with hard work and effort, where if we knew effective techniques, then the same amount of effort would have taken us much further, or we could have gotten to the same place where we are with much less effort. Because it's not really widely taught, I think it's a great opportunity to get ahead, and it definitely creates an advantage if you do know how to learn. It takes effort. It's not like you're made aware of a technique, suddenly you can apply it properly. It actually requires quite a bit of practice and upfront time investment. But the thing is, a lot of us are already going to university, we're already studying on the side, we're trying to upskill in this or that, and we're spending time in it anyway. So if you're spending time in it anyway, and you're not confident that you're doing it effectively and most efficiently, then really one of the priorities should be learning how to do it properly because you're doing it anyway, and so that you do it properly. Otherwise, it's hard to know how much time we're wasting or how much further we could have gone if we had learned the skill properly. In general, it's beneficial for our career because it will enable and empower us to acquire more knowledge, to broaden our skill set. We can go deeper within a certain domain, or in the case where we need to completely reinvent ourselves because our industry gets made redundant, then of course having the skill of learning quickly and developing expertise quickly is going to be invaluable. It's given me much more confidence to change careers, or take career breaks multiple times in the past, because figuring it out helped me feel competent, and it gave me a sense of self-belief that I could excel with less effort, and if needed, I could develop expertise in different areas without having to worry so much about falling behind due to taking time off or by having to start again and switch jobs, which I've done a couple times in the last few years. Yeah, so the question I would like to ask you is, are you confident in your ability to learn effectively? This is a bit different to whether you like learning new things or not, and it's also different to whether you put effort into learning new things. Specifically, are you confident in your ability that if you were asked to learn something new, you'd be able to develop expertise effectively? Would you be confident in your ability to become an expert quickly? I would argue that if you haven't invested time into figuring out how to, then there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. Here are some concepts I'd like to share that I took away from the I Can Study learning course. The first insight was about higher order learning. There's like a pyramid where as you go higher up the pyramid, the type of understanding at the top of the pyramid is often associated with expert understanding, whereas the stuff at the bottom is less valuable and is less indicative of expertise. The insight there is understanding. It's like the second lowest level on that pyramid, and it's only above remembering, which is like memorizing stuff. So at the bottom of the pyramid, it's like memorizing, which is pretty obvious because when people think about learning, you're like, at school, you can't just memorize it because you don't really understand it. But when you say it that way, it implies that understanding is a really good goal. Whereas in this paradigm, it's just like one level above the lowest level. Learning about what were the high levels, with the highest level being create and the second highest one being evaluate. So an expert's able to evaluate things and analyze things and apply things. And that's much higher than merely being able to understand it and memorize. In the past, I'd be focusing on the understanding, which is basically, what is this? What does it mean? How can I understand what I'm reading here? That's a pretty low level of learning. Whereas the evaluation, which is very high, is the ability to evaluate the knowledge and figure out how it links to different concepts within that field, and basically put a value on which is better than which in which situations. And when you lay it out like that, it makes sense. That's the ability that someone would have if they're an expert in the field. They'd be able to provide an analysis and evaluation as opposed to merely understand what something is. The second insight is when you approach learning, it's really effective to try and evaluate the topic first and concepts and figure out the logic behind it. And you prioritize that actually above understanding what something is and the details. You start with the top and the lower levels become easier. Whereas the natural way I would have approached learning in the past is I would start near the bottom, and then I would have felt after I do the easy stuff, then you slowly move towards the harder stuff, which might be the high levels. So I would actually just try and understand what's happening first, and I wouldn't move on before I understood something in a textbook. But I learned that effective learners, they get a big overview first and evaluate the whole topic, and only after they get the overview will they go and try and understand the small details and then go to the small facts. Right? That's a big trap that a lot of people fall into. They try and do what they think is proper learning, or they try and be careful and they want to fully understand something before they move on. It sounds sensible and it actually sounds like they really care, but in terms of whether it's effective or not and whether they're focusing on the right level at the right time, they're not. The third insight is about cognitive load. The idea behind cognitive load is the more we're holding ideas and analyzing them in our mind, and the more difficult it feels at the time, it's actually correlated with better retention. So it means that if we're learning and it's so easy and we don't feel like we're using our brain very much, then it's less likely that we're going to retain that information. The reason this is really important is because cognitive load, it's correlated with the rate of note taking. If we take so many notes as we're learning or as we're sitting in a lecture, we're offloading that information onto paper, onto our laptop when we type it. And it actually doesn't feel like our mind is being used very much. Whereas if we took less notes at the time and we're focusing on analyzing and evaluating information in our mind, that actually feels harder. But learning how to do that properly, that actually results in us retaining the information better. And The ironic thing is the person who's taking more notes and doing it rapidly, they might feel like they're being effective, right? But then the thing is, because they're not holding any cognitive load, it's less likely that they're going to be able to remember that content later on. The person who's evaluating it and thinking, how does this relate to that? Why is this important? And doing it in their head and only committing it to notes when it's really necessary or when the cognitive load becomes a bit unreasonable, they're more likely to do better. It's an example of where the hard work is not enough. It's hard work with deliberate practice, with the proper technique, then you get a really good result. The next insight is about the form of the notes. I've been used to writing out my notes either on paper at school or typing out my notes, etc. But then what I learned in this course was about the power of visual notes. When you represent something visually, it's able to capture more information and more efficiently than if you were to write it. You can express so much more information much more simply. Like you can draw arrows, you can use colors, you can play with the text size, etc., etc. We learn how to take visual notes, and it facilitates the higher order learning if you create visual notes in a specific, deliberate way, which also maintains cognitive load. Someone who knows how to make an intentional mind map, which adheres to these top-level learning techniques, it's like they have a different technology compared to someone who's only relying on written notes, and that's the only thing they've known their whole lives. The learning outcomes is just going to be so much different, even if they put in the same amount of effort. The next one is order control. When we're approaching a topic and a resource, let's say a textbook, it's often not in our interest to learn the content in the order that the author wrote the textbook in. So the principle of order control means we can jump around the textbook in order to evaluate the whole topic and figure out the main logic, as well as satisfy our curiosity, because when we satisfy our curiosity, it's hard for our brain to get bored, rather than just understanding the information in front of us, where we're not really understanding why it's relevant, or it's not really answering the question that we think is really important and that we're curious about. Effective learners often jump around. They'll jump around a single resource, as well as jump around different resources, and in the end, they might cover that information very deeply, but the point is they're not going to go in a prescribed order. It's actually quite inefficient and ineffective to go in the order prescribed. But I don't feel like anyone knows that. At school, definitely nobody taught me that. Everyone just assumed, right? The book's written in a certain way. It's got page 1, page 2, page 3. So let's learn page 1 first, then page 2, then page 3. I appreciate that a lot of these concepts are pretty abstract, and it's definitely not my intention to teach you how to learn in this video. It's more just to share the experience and some of my takeaways and insights. I do have some videos on this channel where I'm applying these techniques. Feel free to check out the channel. However, I would recommend you check out Justin Sung's channel. I think it's excellent. And also the course is called I Can Study, so I'll link to those in the description, because I think that's an excellent place to learn the skill properly. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope it was useful. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.